a real estate agent in prime Manhattan and Brooklyn. Thank you very much for listening. It's great to be here with you virtually from my home office. I very much look forward to seeing you in person again sometime soon. You know, my friends and acquaintances have been asking what's going on with New York City, with the economy, with real estate. You know, when will we be able to reopen, get haircuts again, go to our favorite restaurants and stores? What's going on with New York City in general? I'll speak first on New York City real estate and the economy, and in terms of specifics, in terms of what we know about the reopening. Well, in areas outside of New York City, there's been an incremental reopening. So in the rest of New York State or the rest of the country, as they've entered basically into what's known as phase one, phase two, phase three, they've seen this incremental step-by-step reopening. They've seen a gradual return of demand. Jobs are returning, and consumers have proven to be very willing to spend. Housing demand also is steadily increasing. And the government, the federal government, many state governments have said that they're committed to do whatever it takes to achieve full recovery. We also know that mortgage rates are very low, some weeks or some days near a 30-year low, and could go even lower. In terms of taking up this opportunity, we know that applications for mortgages to buy a home, not just refinance, but to buy a home, are up 13% now versus a year ago. Now, when most showings are restricted, where in New York City we can't even meet with clients or show properties in person as a licensed associate real estate broker. But still, applications for mortgages to buy a home are up 13% now versus a year ago. On the short-term interest rate side, not mortgage rates, but short-term, the Fed funds rate, what the Federal Reserve can directly control, the Federal Reserve has said that they'll stay at zero likely through 2022. That's a year and a half from now, largely due to anticipated very low inflation, which is the main driver that influences the pricing of these mortgage-backed bonds, which in turn portends what banks charge for mortgage interest rates. As for consumer prices right now, they fell for the third straight month. Not sure if that's a definition of deflation, but certainly we don't have inflation happening right now. And as the Federal Reserve has just said and shown through their commitment to keeping the short-term interest rate, the benchmark rate, at zero for the next year and a half, they don't anticipate inflation to be a problem or to be noticeable for the foreseeable future. Also, the long-term benefits of home ownership are still here. You've got the deductibility of interest expense for a home. If it's an investment property that you're renting out and declaring it under Schedule E, basically all expenses are deductible, including depreciation. Of course, I'm not a CPA. You'd want to speak with your own accountant, but there's a lot of deduction opportunities, is the point, on your income taxes. There's an opportunity for price appreciation, and when you sell it in the future, if it's your home, you'd enjoy an exemption on taxation on the long-term capital gain. If you're single or married filing separately, that exemption at the moment is $250,000. That first $250,000 of gain is not taxed on a capital gains basis. And if you're married filing jointly, it's $500,000 that's not taxed on the long-term capital gains basis when it's sold. If it's an investment property, when it's sold, you could take advantage of the 1031 exchange, which has been around for decades. So has this exemption that we're just speaking about on the long-term capital gains for a home that you live in. But the 1031 exchange defers the long-term capital gains as long as you keep on exchanging and keep on staying with the program. Again, these have been around for decades. This isn't any new program, and it's likely here to stay for the foreseeable future. We've seen structural shift, acceleration of recent trends in terms of the work environment. Most companies likely will allow remote work going forward for the foreseeable future, as they've been forced to do during this, forced to do serve by fire during this COVID-19 testing period. But remote work is likely an opportunity to buy, or at least trade up, maybe rent a home that's different, trade up for more space and a better home environment, both for living and for working, like here in my home office. So in short, homes are more important now than ever. I'd now like to refer to our chief economist with leading real estate companies of the world, Dr. Marcy Rosell. Um, and she refers to a couple of studies that I think are quite illustrative. First, there was a study by Columbia University in 2002 that attempted to address the question, analyze and answer the question, can temporary shocks affect long-term equilibrium on prices, on how the economy functions, on structural trends within the economy, etc. And as an example, they looked at the bombings of Japanese cities in World War II, so 70 years ago. And they looked at population trends, industrial employment trends prior to the bombing, prior to the 1940s, and then 20 years afterwards. And they looked at other things too. But what they found in this particular case, in their study, in the conclusion of their study, was that the long-term trajectory does not change over 20 years. Again, the long-term trajectory doesn't change in the long term after terrible shocks, even though in the short term, obviously the shocks are horrible, horrific, devastating, but over the long term, the trends don't change. In The Economist magazine, there was an article in March of this year, March 12th, in that edition actually, that examined long-term effects of devastating short-term events. And it concluded that the long-term effects, again, are not always devastating or terrible. Take, for example, the shore homes after Hurricane Sandy that struck either as a hurricane or not quite a hurricane, very terrible storm in New York and Long Island, and certainly the shore in New Jersey as well, Ocean County, etc. But it found that the shore homes are now 70% higher in value than they were before Hurricane Sandy. Yet in the midst of Hurricane Sandy, or in the direct aftermath of it, many people thought, they're not moving back to the shore, or insurance rates are going to be way too high, or it's just going to be cost prohibitive to live there, or too dangerous to live there, etc. In the financial district of Manhattan, downtown Manhattan, after 9/11, 2001, 19 years ago, prices are now double there on average than what they were before 2001. And of course, there's been inflation since then, but double. And many people had thought, in the midst of 9/11, I was one of those who was living in the area on Broad Street, Wall Street basically, that I would not want to go back to that area and live there. Actually, I didn't live there anymore. I moved shortly thereafter, after 9/11. But the fact is that the trends weren't shaken off their core, and the trends continued, and prices increased, as I've just said, in the financial district after 9/11. I guess it can be said that short-term memories fade. Also, speaking of 9/11, surveys found directly afterwards that 50% of respondents did not want to work or live again in high-rise buildings anymore. That didn't pan out to be true over the long term. A temporary softening or disruption, like what we might be going through right now, although it's hard to tell because we're closed and so we don't really have data in general in terms of what's going on. I mean, current listings right now are 90% lower than what they were at this time, typically our busy spring season, than what they were last year. So we don't really have data right now, but a temporary softening, disruption, creates an opportunity for new entrants to come into the marketplace, which then can fuel a virtuous cycle over the medium to long term. I mean, consider this. There might be some people, certainly not everyone, but there might be some people who have always thought of, dreamed of living in Manhattan, prime Brooklyn, and New York City, and they believe that they couldn't afford it, or they believe that the conditions weren't right for them, or whatever, and so they haven't lived in New York City. In this time of disruption, perhaps there are some sellers or some landlords who are motivated. Perhaps the disruption might cause, certainly it's caused a drop in inventory. It might have a softening of demand, of course. And that may make an opportunity for price, create an opportunity for people to come in at a low price or favorable price, at least in the short term. So this new demand that likely will come into the city, come into our real estate market, will, over the short to medium term, create a floor in prices, new demand coming in to replenish the demand that may have temporarily or permanently left by some people choosing to leave the city for now. So the cycle always turns. Many of us say never bet against New York City. It comes back, especially in terms of New York City real estate. As for the reopening, well, in New York State, typically it's been 2 weeks, or phase two, the next phase, has typically been 2 weeks after phase one has been launched. In New York City, phase one, which includes construction and manufacturing, farming, frankly, a lot of things that are not applicable to Manhattan, but phase one was launched last Monday, June 8th. And so therefore, if the 2 week model holds, phase two, which does include real estate and limited dining at restaurants, typically outside, haircuts, etc., that could be, phase two could be as early as next Monday, June 22nd. However, publicly, Mayor de Blasio has said that phase two for New York City would most likely be early July. So whether it's a week from now or 3 weeks from now, it will be soon. And I very much look forward to seeing you all in person again, getting back to work at some point, and showing off some of these fantastic Manhattan homes, either for investment or to live in. And hopefully we'll be able to do that again soon. It's been 3 months, a long time under lockdown. In some ways it's lasted on and on, in other ways it's flown by. And it's apparently near an end, at least in terms of the lockdown and phase one, as we shift into phase two, and then hopefully subsequently phase three, as long as cases are down and we're all very careful with our masks and hand sanitizers and conscientiousness towards other people, as long as we keep those virus cases down. So anyway, have a great day. Thanks for listening. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, all of my social media, contact information, website details are available on a landing page, which is http://www.jacobemiles.com. Take care and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.